tell right now, we have over 40 attendees. So if you are here for the media briefing from the Colorado Reproductive Health Rights and Justice Coalition, you are at the right spot. We're going to give it 1 to 2 minutes extra to let more people in, as we can only imagine a lot of you have been jumping from calls and just finishing statements or interviewing folks. So again, we're going to start at around 12:06 Mountain Time for any of y'all that are in different time zones and joining us from other states other than Colorado. So we thank you for your patience, and we will be getting started in about 2 minutes. All right. Again, for folks that are just joining us, if you are here for the media briefing for the Colorado Repro Health Rights and Justice Coalition, you are in the right place. We do want to give you all some, rules of how this is going to work out. My name is, by the way, Aria Bolaños Perea. I'm the Strategic Communications Director at Color. I will be one of your moderators today. And for folks that are joining us from media and press, as you very well know from being in Zoom for a while now, we will be using the Q&A function for today's media briefing. Do not post your questions on the comment section. They will get lost in the conversation of today. Please send your questions to the Q&A option of Zoom. And Lauren, who is here, is going to be my co-moderator as well. We will be reading those questions out to the folks that are speaking at the media press briefing today. So I will also be introducing the people that will be speaking here. And folks, when I call out your name, wave, say hey. It's just for the interest of time, I'll call out your names, your title, and what organization you're with. And also media, if there is a question that you want to be directed to a specific member here of our panelists today, please add that in the question. Say this question is for Shara, this question is for Nicole, this question is for Summer. And panelists, please add your title and organization you are with. So name, org, title, so that the media can also know who these questions are going to be going towards. So thank you everybody for your patience. Lauren, if you could make sure that folks, once I read out their names, we can post the names for everyone, so people can also correctly write those as they're writing out quotes. We want to make sure that in the interest of time, there is that going on. Okay. I think we're official at 12:07, so we will begin. Panelists, I think I need a nod. Cool, awesome. So welcome everybody. This is, again, a media briefing from the Colorado Reproductive Health Rights and Justice Coalition, specifically to respond to the news of this morning on the Dobbs v. Jehu decision, where Roe v. Wade has been overturned. I want to start this as well, that we need to hold our community close, that the questions that you ask here today, please being intentional to make sure that they are clear as to what we are speaking about today. It goes without saying, it is a difficult time for a lot of us, but the fight doesn't stop here. And this is exactly why we have a panelist of experts in this field that are going to speak with you all today. They will be giving 2 to 3 minute intros and with their statements. So please, we will begin there, and I will name you who will be speaking today. We have Karen Middleton, President and CEO of Cobalt Advocates. We have Michaela Aguilar, Deputy Director of Color. We have Jack Teeter, Regional Director of Government Affairs from PPRM. Talea Banks, Let My People Vote Coordinator and with Soul to Soul Sisters. Summer Nettles, Communications Director for Progress Now Colorado Education. Sarah Laughlin, Executive Director for Progress Now Colorado. Shara Smith, Executive Director from Interfaith Alliance of Colorado. Nicole Hensel, Executive Director from New Era Colorado. And Asma Keeler, Staff Attorney from ACLU of Colorado. My name is Aria Bolaños Perea. I am the Strategic Comms Director at Color, and I will be passing it to Lawrence for her to introduce herself.
Hi all, thank you for coming. My name is Lauren Stevenson, pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the Coalition and Outreach Communications Manager for Progress Now Colorado.
Thank you, Lauren. And just as I stated before, we will go in order of the names that I just called out. So Karen, we will begin with you with your statement from Cobalt, and then we'll pass it to Michaela, and y'all can see the orders in the chat. So.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for your time and thanks for tuning in today. As this decision is devastating, and while we expected it, we still see that this is a sad day. Cobalt stands with everyone who needs access to abortion care. We will continue to press forward to both encourage people from an advocacy, policy, and education side, and we will also ensure that Coloradans and anyone who needs access to abortion care, anyone who needs to travel here can get the access that they need. We are particularly struck by the overreach of this court decision that includes speculation in the Thomas dissent or Thomas decision around expanding his issues and saying that we would contemplate other issues that might include overturning same-sex marriage, that might even extend all the way back to the 60s around what you can do with birth control. So Cobalt is saddened today, but we are ready to press forward, and we are here with our partners to really speak out against this decision and to say that we are here to keep fighting forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. My name is Michaela Aguilar, and I am the Deputy Director at the Colorado Organization for Latina Opportunity and Reproductive Rights. COLOR is a grassroots reproductive justice organization that is Latinx-led and serving. And for 24 years, we have been organizing in Colorado to build power for our communities with the goal of removing barriers and expanding access to abortion. We believe that every Latinx person and their family deserves to live safe, healthy, and self-determined lives. That is reproductive justice, and that is liberation. Today, we are grieving for the 5.7 million Hispanic or Latino people and 36 million women, trans men, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people who will now lose access to life-saving reproductive care because of SCOTUS's decision. The truth is, abortion care has always been out of reach for Latinx people and other communities of color who face systemic barriers, even with Roe v. Wade as the law of the land. Legality never meant we had access to healthcare, transportation, or time off work to receive care. Roe was always the floor, and that is why today and every day, COLOR works towards a future where abortion is safe, accessible, and without shame. We are so grateful that Coloradans' abortion rights are protected through the work we've done together with REA, the Reproductive Health Equity Act. As we face more barriers ahead, we call on legislators and community members to support the critical work of ensuring our fundamental rights to build our families as we decide. Reproductive justice is when community leads the work towards our collective liberation. We imagine a world where everyone has access to the resources they need to make informed decisions about their bodies and lives with dignity and respect, all without fear of discrimination, surveillance, retaliation, or violence from individuals or the government.
Thank you, Michaela. Jack.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jack Teeter. I'm the Regional Director of Government Affairs at Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains, which includes Colorado, New Mexico, Southern Nevada, and Wyoming. Colorado is a safe haven for abortion care. We already see patients from every state in the country. And here in Colorado, Planned Parenthood is the largest provider of family planning services in the state. Today, we are furious and devastated. We are also determined and we are ready. I am the most angry because of who will pay the price for this unconscionable cruelty. Our patients who are young, who are people of color, who are undocumented, who live in rural areas across our region. And for many of the communities who we serve, the post-Roe world has already been the reality for decades. We have already seen an enormous increase of Texas patients in our region. These are people who have driven 1,000 miles one way through the night. The majority of abortion patients in this country are already parents, and so they're arriving with their sleepy kids in the back seat, and they are arriving terrorized by Republican politicians in their home states who have made abortion care already impossible to access. And now 25 additional states will join Texas within the next month, in some cases the next several days. Texas, Oklahoma, North and South Dakota, Wyoming, Idaho, Utah. These states will all ban abortion and will make it a crime, right, with criminal penalties and jail time. The governor of Nebraska is interested in convening a special session to ban abortion. And so we are looking at 36 million women and trans and non-binary people who can get pregnant with no abortion access in their home communities. And to give you a more local sense of the scale of what we are facing, there were 55,000 people in Texas who received abortion care last year, and that was with Texas's existing restrictions in place. In Colorado, we served 11,000 abortion patients last year. So that's the scale locally, right? 5 times as many patients who will be traveling from only one of the nearby states. Thanks.
Thank you, Jack. Passing it over to Talia, and I apologize for mispronouncing your name if I did, so please, for the media to get it right as well.
You actually said it perfectly. Hello, my name is Talia Banks. I am the Let My People Vote coordinator for Soul to Soul Sisters, where we organize for Black liberation, health, and joy. Today, we are experiencing a monumental moment in our fundamental right to access abortion. And while we celebrate the passing of REA that protects abortion in Colorado, we are grieving with the rest of the country whose access to abortion have become burdensome. We are fully aware that we are the creators of our own freedom, and today calls us forward into our deeper magic to extend our reproductive rights into community care. While this moment intends to build shame around abortion, we must resist the tensions of silence and speak what is true and right in our beings and in our bodies. The overturning of Roe versus Wade privileges this country's legacy of slavery, white supremacy, and constant attempts to prevent Black people from building safe communities. For us to exercise our autonomy and agency, we do not consent to the hijacking of our emotional, spiritual, and physical bodies. The decision to access abortion is a sacred, holy decision affirmed by our collective and individual action. May we, as Colorado's communities, create sustainable spaces to receive, support, and love our most marginalized neighbors through sacred agency. For too long, Black communities have experienced the brunt of reproductive oppression in this country. It's time we learn to protect and advocate for Black women, Black trans women, Black gender expansive people, Black disabled people, Black Indigenous people, Black incarcerated people. This decision impacts every intersection. It's time to put money and resources to protecting us during this time. We cannot back down now. Thank you.
Thank you, Summer.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Summer Nettles. I'm the Communications Director at Progress Now Colorado Education. Our position as one of the largest communication organizations for progressive infrastructure in the state as well as the country is one of education and understanding. I think it's really important that we know that the history of abortion and its criminalization and demonization comes out of power grabs from the medical community to have and exert more control over women's bodies. Specifically, when it comes to Black women, we're talking about a group of women who were not allowed access to abortion even when it was legal prior to 1860 because of enslavement. So for years, Black women and women of color were forced to carry pregnancies to term to provide valuable bodies to a society that was going to continue to use and abuse them. In the 1860s, when we saw freedom from oppression, in 1865, it was still very hard for Black women to access abortion care. In the meantime, Black women were really the people on whom abortion access was built because our organizations, our midwifery was responsible for making sure that our white female counterparts had access to prenatal and natal care, and so it's intrinsic to all women and especially women of color that access is addressed and maintained, and it's also intrinsic to understanding the historical nature and importance of abortion to freedom itself for women in our country.
Thank you, Summer. Passing it on to Sarah.
Thank you. My name is Sarah Laughlin, and I'm the Executive Director for Progress Now Colorado. Until we at Progress Now, again, are the state's oldest multi-issue advocacy organization in the state, having operated since 2003 to address progressive issues and advance progressive platforms. Today, we are grieving alongside our allies here because abortion rights and reproductive rights are foundational health care for women, but non-binary and transgender people. And we recognize and we call out the fact that it is women of color and young women and low-income women that are disproportionately affected by this, as abortion care and reproductive health care have been disproportionately inaccessible for decades. The Supreme Court's decision today puts lives of millions of women, non-binary and transgender individuals at risk. And we are outraged by the fact that they would dare to set us back decades and generations in their decision. We are thankful that we have the Reproductive Health Equity Act to protect women's rights to abortion here in Colorado. And we look forward to continuing to make sure that Colorado is a state that is safe for all people to access women's health or access reproductive and abortion care. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Passing it on to Shara.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Shara Smith. I'm the Executive Director of the Interfaith Alliance of Colorado. We're an interfaith public policy and advocacy organization with over 24 faiths represented in our network, which is a huge part of why today's Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade is extremely disappointing and worrisome. The faith community is not a monolithic group. Different faith traditions have different beliefs about reproductive rights and freedom, and particularly about abortion. Today's SCOTUS decision makes it possible for states to enact laws that infringe on an individual's right to exercise their own faith tradition when it comes to reproductive rights. We're already seeing this begin to play out in Florida, where a local synagogue filed a lawsuit against the state, arguing that Florida's new abortion restrictions infringe on members of the Jewish community to exercise their faith when it comes to such a deeply personal decision. We believe that abortion is a deeply personal decision and one each of us should have the freedom to make based on our own faith traditions and beliefs. In Colorado, we thankfully passed the Reproductive Health Equity Act, or REA, which guarantees the right of all Coloradans to have access to reproductive health care. But residents of surrounding states that don't have such protections will have no choice but to seek care here in Colorado. This SCOTUS decision will affect millions across the country, and most adversely, those from low-income communities and communities of color. On a personal level, as a woman, as a Black woman, as someone who is younger than the Roe v. Wade decision, who has lived her entire life knowing that this right was mine and my decision alone, this SCOTUS decision feels like an injury. It is unprecedented for the Supreme Court to use the power of the judiciary to disrupt equality instead of supporting it. There are millions of us waking up this morning with no reference for what it means to have fewer rights today than we had yesterday. Regardless of this decision, the Interfaith Alliance of Colorado will continue working to protect faith and freedom in our state and to ensure that all Coloradans, regardless of their faith tradition, can have the freedom to exercise their faith when it comes to the most deeply personal decisions of their lives. Thank you for being here today.
Absolutely. Thank you. Nicole?
Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Hensel. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the executive director of New Era Colorado. New Era is a nonpartisan nonprofit that organizes young people ages 16 through 34 through the political process to win on the youth agenda. We fight for reproductive rights through our pro-abortion youth-led advocacy program, the Brazen Project. Today's young people are the most progressive and most diverse generation that has ever existed. We also make up the largest voting bloc in the state. Here at Colorado and nationwide, we represent over a third of the electorate. And so we demand that our voices be heard and that our leaders take action in alignment with our values. Let's be clear that abortion bans are systemic discrimination and racism in action. They are outright attacks on our basic human rights. This decision is a direct threat to our bodily autonomy and will profoundly harm people of color, low-income folks, and young people who already experience steep barriers to abortion access, like cost, the inability to take time off from competing responsibilities, parental notification laws, and stigma. The Supreme Court ruled against the values of young people across Colorado, and our generation overwhelmingly supports abortion access because we value bodily autonomy and the freedom to choose our own future. In a listening tour that we conducted last year of over 1,200 young people across the state, the majority named abortion as one of their top 5 issues. Pew Research Center found that 73% of young adults believe that Roe v. Wade should not be overturned, and 7 in 10 young people under the age of 30 believe that abortion should be legal in all or most cases. Young people are grappling with an uncertain future as we deal with a multi-layered economic crisis, the ever-mounting threats of climate change, all which impact young people of color and low-income folks the most. So being able to make the right decision to plan and care for our families and our future is even more crucial. We also know that a multiracial representative democracy depends on respect for basic human rights and the enfranchisement of all community members. So today's ruling is a targeted effort to silence our voices and disempower and disenfranchise historically marginalized communities. We know this fight is about power and control, and our generation will not stand silently by as our basic humanity and dignity are being denied. And so as we mourn the loss today of Roe, we should also consider what we've always known, which is that Roe was the floor and never the ceiling. And now it's time that we build for a better, more accessible future for abortion care. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. And lastly, Asma, passing it to you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Asma Kadri-Keeler. I'm a staff attorney with the ACLU of Colorado. The ACLU has unfortunately been preparing for this moment for years and will carry out a multi-pronged approach to stem the tide of attacks on abortion and expand access where possible. The ACLU has fought for abortion rights since before Roe was decided, and that doesn't stop now. So I'm going to offer some legal perspective for a couple of things to zero in on after the decision. I'll talk about what the ruling does, what's to come, and how abortion access remains protected in Colorado, as most of you already know. First, and most importantly, this opinion opened the door to allow legislatures across the country to eliminate the right to abortion. As you may well know, 26 states have in place laws that were unenforceable because of Roe, known as trigger laws. As of this morning, those laws can now take effect, and abortion is automatically illegal in many of those places, including, as Jack mentioned, Colorado's neighboring states of Utah, Wyoming, and Oklahoma. In the Dobbs decision, the court claimed that overturning Roe is not departing from precedent because Roe was improperly reasoned in the first place. Justice Alito made the egregious comparison of stripping a woman's right to choose to the decision in Brown versus Board of Education, which invalidated the era of Jim Crow separate but equal laws. By connecting Plessy versus Ferguson, the case that cemented the separate but equal ideology, to Roe versus Wade, the majority opinion felt comfortable holding today that Roe, like Plessy, was improperly reasoned and thus needed to be overturned. Those present here can clearly see why that comparison is patently illogical, but it is worth stressing because it shines a light on how this court views what is considered settled law. As Justice Alito wrote himself, the due process clause, in their view, only includes the first 8 amendments as substantive rights and other rights only when this radical court says so. In fact, earlier this week, this same court gutted another well-settled law and held that Miranda rights are no longer enforceable in a civil suit. While Colorado has protected abortion access for pregnant people seeking reproductive health care, thanks to the hard work of this coalition and others and the passage of the Reproductive Health Equity Act, the danger of this opinion isn't limited to abortion rights. Justice Thomas wrote in his concurring opinion explicitly that Griswold versus Connecticut, which was the case that granted right to access contraception, Lawrence versus Texas, which invalidated the criminalization of same-sex intimacy and largely paved the way for the broader LGBTQ community to love one another in public. And of course, Obergefell versus Hodges, which granted the right to same-sex marriage, should all be overruled. The court took pains to consider the history and tradition of our country and spent an inordinate amount of time focusing on how long abortion was considered a crime prior to Roe versus Wade. But an essential human right to bodily autonomy being criminalized by legislators can hardly be the standard by which we hold ourselves. As I previously mentioned, same-sex intimacy and same-sex marriage were also a crime for the better part of the 20th century. And historically, so too was a woman's right to vote and a Black person's ability to exist in public places. Colorado remains a state where people can feel safe in their modern day views of liberty, but 36 million people soon will not have that liberty. The existing web of roadblocks to get an abortion are part of a larger, cruel, and calculated plan to disrupt time-sensitive and essential healthcare. While Colorado has its laws in place, such as the Reproductive Health Equity Act, that offer more robust protections for us here, that doesn't mean that our work here is done, and we will not back down. As the court told us this morning, we can expect challenges to many other well-settled rights, including our right to access birth control, gender-affirming care, voting rights, and the right to marry who we love. We will keep fighting and advocating for essential reproductive care until all people can decide if and when to have a child. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for sharing your statements from your organizations and for being here in this moment to answer also questions from the press. So for all of you here that have just joined us, I will start reading the questions that have been sent through the Q&A function. Oh, Lauren. Yes.
Sorry, just one.
No, it's okay.
We're going to hear from Lisa Cutter.
Oh, Lisa Cutter is here, so passing it on
Yes.
to her.
Whoops, now I can't get off of mute. So sorry about that. I wasn't sure about the opportunity to speak. I really, really appreciate hearing from everyone here today. I think there's been some really eloquent statements from women about the impact of this legislation. I'm here, or this decision. I'm here as a representative of the co-chair of the Democratic Women's Caucus of Colorado with my, I don't believe my co-chair Monica Duran is on, but we chair this together. And we have sent out a very strong statement this morning about our desire to support anything we can and to continue to fight. The Democratic Women's Caucus of Colorado is outraged and appalled at today's Supreme Court decision decimating the right to abortion after 49 years of precedence. Abortion is still legal in the state. Health centers remain open and operating, and those seeking abortion should make and keep appointments. And despite the strong legislation we passed this session to enshrine abortion rights protections, we've implemented here in Colorado, it is clear that our work is not done. We must continue fighting to further protect abortion providers and those seeking abortion care in Colorado. And it's really clear that this is going to impact women of color and marginalized communities, people of color and marginalized communities far more than it will the rest of us. Many of us will still be able to seek and get abortion care, and that's not okay. We're here to fight for everyone and support any efforts moving forward. Thank you for hosting this today.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure I haven't missed anybody, right, Lauren, after this? Okay, great. So folks from the media, again, if you sent your questions through the Q&A function, thank you. I will be the one moderating those questions. And since many of you have very similar ones, I will try and do my best to put them together. So we've gotten quite a bit of questions, and these will be directed towards PPRM and Cobalt. Given the expected influx of demand, what are the current wait times to get a procedure in Colorado, and how has that changed lately? In addition, is there any need for more clinics and providers to meet the expected needs? That's part one. And also, how does this change many or if any of the security precautions that many of our clinics have here in Colorado? So I will pass that on to you first, Jack, and then Karen.
Thanks for your question, John. The wait time has increased. It is averaging between 2 or 3 weeks, sort of depending on the service, right? So we also provide sort of acute urgent care, right? If someone calls us and says, hey, I think I have a urinary tract infection, I need to come in right now. But yeah, those wait times are certainly extending. I think when we think about these next several months as these trigger bans go into effect, right, we should expect those wait times to increase because they're the math, right? There will just be an influx of thousands of additional patients traveling from out of state. As to your question around additional providers, I am calling on the state to convene sort of an emergency response public health task force to talk about the increase of patient volume and how we can triage those folks across the state. The entire statewide health system is going to experience the ripple effects of having thousands of out-of-state patients travel into Colorado, and that will extend wait times for contraceptive appointments, cancer screenings, STI tests for everyone in the primary care space in Colorado. And I think that for providers that are interested in starting to provide abortion care, providers who are interested in getting signed up to dispense medication abortion, those will be some sort of immediate ways that we can expand access. As to your question about the percentage of abortions in Colorado that are procedural versus medication, last year medication abortion accounted for about 68% of abortion care provided in Colorado. And that was about 7,500 people. As to the security question, obviously I can't speak about our security specifics for security reasons, but I can tell you that no one should face harassment or violence when they're seeking to access abortion care. And we reassess our security needs constantly and make adjustments whenever we need to.
And this is Karen with Cobalt, and I'll just build off of that. The network of people who provide abortion care across the state have been meeting and working to increase access and availability by collaborating, by bringing in additional providers, and by sharing needs among each other. So the clinic wait times do differ from clinic to clinic, and there are some clinics that are still ramping up. So despite all of that, we will definitely see more need than we can provide in the short run. And I do believe that we will do everything in our power to ramp that up. And there is a group that's actively meeting to do that right now.
Okay, thank you, Karen. I think for any specific questions, again, for the media here that are about operations, clinics, security, please send those to Cobalt and PPRN. And Jack, I see you unmuted yourself, so I'll give you, no? Okay. And folks from our panelists, if you or your comms person is here today, please ask them to put their information on the chat so that media can refer to them directly. Now we have a question that this will be for Talia and Nicole. Matt Moret is asking about plans to collect signatures for a ballot measure codifying abortion access into the state constitution, and not just directed to you both, but if anybody else here in the panel, please just signal if you want to answer to that.
Yeah, Karen, did you want to take the ones on the ballot measure?
I would be happy to. So we are planning to run a ballot measure that will both enshrine access to abortion in the Constitution and most importantly, also overturn the state funding ban on abortion. And we will be doing that in 2024. We are nearly a year into planning for that already. I'm not going to speak to the timeline, but I will say that we're definitely looking at 2024. And so we have some time. And the specific language we will not be releasing yet, but we'll be testing language and talking to voters and making sure they understand what we are planning well before that election. Did I cover everything? I think so. Okay. Thank you.
You're on mute.
Thank you for that. It happens when you're having 18 different tabs open. So what I will do now is answer one of the questions that we do have in Spanish, folks. So appreciate your grace in this. Aidari Riera, after this decision, how do you think that the future of Planned Parenthood, and also Jack, if you like to answer in English, and then I can translate, here in Colorado would look like, or what is going to change? And Aidari, I think this is what the future of abortion looks like here in Colorado. And if that is not correct, please add that into the chat, but I will try my best and answer that in Spanish first. And then Jack, passing it to you as if I need to translate anything. Lo que sabemos aquí en Colorado es que lo más importante que la comunidad tiene que saber es que el aborto sigue siendo legal y va a seguir siendo accesible para todas las personas que lo necesiten. Eso es el producto del trabajo que hemos hecho como una organización, no nada más en color, Planned Parenthood, Cobalt, Interfaith, todos los que estén aquí, pero la colaboración de nuestra comunidad aquí en Colorado. Es muy importante que todos sepan que gracias a la Ley de Equidad en Salud Reproductiva, o REA en inglés, estos derechos fundamentales están protegidos bajo la ley de Colorado. Entonces el aborto sigue siendo legal y va a seguir siendo legal gracias a el gran trabajo que hemos hecho aquí en el estado. Ahora, ¿cómo van a cambiar las cosas? Muchas personas van a tener miedo, van a estar reaccionando porque no saben cómo se ve el futuro, pero lo que les queremos decir es de, por favor, mantengan sus citas, sigan siendo parte de este movimiento para un futuro de justicia reproductiva, y hay que seguir en esto juntos porque nada va a ser posible si lo hacemos solos. Y dejaré mi comentario ahí. Jack, anything that I should translate?
I think what I will add is that, our doors are open. We are seeing patients right now in Colorado. And over the next several months, several years, we really need to think about our responsibility, not only to our neighbors and our family here in Colorado, but to our family in Texas and in Nebraska and in Oklahoma and in Wyoming. They are counting on us to keep abortion legal in Colorado because we will be there for them when they need access to this care.
Ok, entonces para nada más traducir lo que acaba de decir Jack, todos nosotros aquí en esta llamada, pero también nuestros cómplices y las personas que nos apoyan, tenemos una responsabilidad para nuestros estados alrededor de nosotros, especialmente también las personas donde el aborto ya ha sido criminalizado, que tenemos que seguir en esto juntos, tenemos que mejorar la manera en la que estamos protegiendo a no nada más las personas de Colorado, pero también a los otros estados y seguir en esta lucha juntos. Y otra vez, para cualquier razón, si tienen una pregunta directa a alguien aquí en el panel y es necesariamente en español, por favor, nada más pongan eso en el correo directamente para que sepamos y manejemos eso juntos. Ahora, Aidari, espero que eso haya respuesto tu pregunta. Y ahora, oh, well, I guess I need to change to English, right? Now we will take a question from Elizabeth Hernandez from the Denver Post. This is going to be for Sarah. Can anyone talk about what policy language might look like in Colorado in regards to what's next for abortion protections in the state?
I think Karen had answered that question pretty thoroughly regarding potential policy language and what that might look like. I was looking at the national abortion ban question, and I think people like Jeff Hunt had signaled very clearly that they have a national abortion ban in their sights. And Coloradans have been clear time and again. I think it has been 4 elections straight now. Karen, please correct me if I'm wrong. 4 straight even year elections where Coloradans have resoundingly rejected bans and restrictions on abortion care. And so we will not be sending, at least from Colorado, a majority delegation that seeks to restrict or ban abortion rights.
Thank you. Also, we're opening this up for anybody else in the panel who would like to answer some of these questions that have been sent into the chat. So feel free to give a statement if you'd like.
I can speak to some of these additional policy protections. I think the most important thing to recognize is that we are really entering an area of unknown risk, right? It is not constitutional for one state to reach into another state to go after a provider, but I think we can certainly expect to see that happening, right? And so some states are considering things like extradition provisions. I do think it's worth exploring areas of law that are more directed around things like provider protections around licensure, for example, and dealing with things like specious licensure accusations coming from out of state. So I think that'll certainly be a consideration. We obviously need to get rid of the public funding ban, and we need to do that very soon. And I think there will be some additional questions that we should look at around expanding access to out-of-state providers, ensuring that providers that will move to Colorado because the states where they have previously provided care have made their job a crime, to make sure that we can integrate them into our statewide health system as quickly as possible.
Thank you. And I think, Jack, just a follow-up from John on, do you think we need a law similar than Connecticut's in regards to protecting Colorado doctors?
Thanks, John. Again, I think we're sort of in this era of unknown risk, right? And so we're going to need to see what the states around us do with their trigger bans, right? We're going to need to see if they do start issuing arrest warrants across state lines, which again is not constitutional now, and that doesn't mean they won't try to do it, right? And so I think those areas of the law are sort of going to unfold as we go. And I think we'll be, looking forward to conversations with our state attorney general around what that looks like. But the thing that I'm the most concerned about is the criminalization of our patients. I'm concerned about patients being criminalized for traveling. And I think the most important thing is this is a race to the bottom, right? We're going to have the creativity of activist prosecutors and anti-abortion politicians in 26 states to come up with whatever horrible things they want to do. And some of those things will be able to block through law. Some of those things will be blocked through the courts. And some of those things will be ridiculous, and we'll just, ignore whatever ridiculous fines they try to send across a state line in a way that is unconstitutional and illegal.
Thank you for that, Jack. There is a lot of information and statistics that are going to be coming up for everybody who is here. So if you need any of those to be clarified, please ask the corresponding person that shared those stats so they can give you that correctly. We want to also make sure that we are informing the public in a very responsive way given to this. So panelists, we have about 10 minutes left. I know a lot of the questions have been directed to specific organizations, but you are also here. So if you would like to unmute and give a follow-up to anything that was asked in the Q&A function, please do so. And I would like to at least start with how this is going to impact youth or marginalized communities. We're not only speaking in Colorado, but throughout the nation. So if anybody would like to unmute to answer that, please go ahead.
I think Summer Nettles, Communications Director at Progress Now, Colorado. I think for youth and marginalized populations, unfortunately, we have a strange dissemination of information. And it's going to be hard for people to filter out what like this means in their state versus what this means for the nation. And that's going to drive people away from seeking services because they're going to make assumptions, or they're going to think it's okay because we've had this right for so long and all of a sudden we've lost it. And I think we have to kind of go back to Representative Cutter's point. My mother had access to abortion as a result of the law passing in 1973. Prior to that, she wouldn't have had that access. My mom had 4 pregnancies before she had me. Some of them were teen pregnancies, which would have resulted in my family literally living in poverty had my mom not had reproductive health rights access. My great-grandmother prevented my grandmother from being pregnant by using a paperclip, by inserting a paperclip into my grandmother to prevent her from getting pregnant in what was then a makeshift IUD in the 1940s. So when we think about like how jarring and how I guess like thoughtful and resourceful women and low-income families have had to be in order to just protect their rights to some semblance of financial freedom or access, and being able to regulate how many mouths you literally have to feed. This legislation, or the necessity for legislation, is key now more than ever. We have to enshrine these rights, and unfortunately in Colorado we have legislators who have worked against it. When the Women's Protection Act of 2021 came to the floor, Lauren Boebert didn't vote for it, and so now it's time to get tough. It's time to hold these legislators accountable and say, Doug Lamborn, Ken Buck, where are you?
This is Karen, and I'd like, thank you, Summer. What I'd like to build off of is just where Colorado is positioned to help people, whether they are coming from other states or coming from in-state and either don't realize the access is available or don't know how to get there. One unique thing about Colorado is that we have been seeing patients from out of state for years because we're one of the only places where people could access abortion later in pregnancy. So a lot of the pathways are in place. We just need to expand those pathways, and you need to recognize that a lot more people are seeking abortion care earlier in the pregnancies when they were able to do so in their home state. So some of the tools are in the toolbox for Colorado. There are a number of providers that are used to working with patients from out of state, and we are expanding that now. There are funds and there are practical support funds around the country that specifically work with populations that need the help, from Indigenous Women Rising, serving Indigenous patients that could be coming from anywhere, to other regional funds, to places that navigate, like Bridget Alliance based in New York. So know that I don't think Colorado is doing it alone. And I think it's up to each of us and our organizations to help share what we know from our vantage point and message to the audiences that we are most familiar with in order to really reach as many people as possible. So that's something I just wanted to build off of from the question of access and who can access care. Thank you.
Talia, passing it on to you about youth perspective about what the future looks like for y'all. And
yeah. For a lot of youth, this is a big moment into aspiring into activism, or like being birthed into activism and being called forward. And so we will continue to be present and to fight and to go into both what it means to do this from a political process within legislative session and within voting. And then we'll also go into community care. How can we care for our community? How can we create, how can we pray? How can we create spirit of sacredness around our bodies? And really resisting shame will be the most important part, that even though these systems are seeing abandoning abortions, but us not interpreting it as shame or having shame for abortions is really our big stance, and like allowing our bodies to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Talia. You put that so beautifully. And I think something else that is important to name when we're talking about the impacts to young people is that even though young people may have technically not lived with like Roe not on the books, that doesn't mean that young people don't know what it feels like to live without access to abortion. And young people often can't access abortion because of finances, traveling, parental consent laws, misinformation from anti-abortion counseling centers, et cetera. And so I think what's important to reaffirm here is that yes, young people are going to be one of the populations that are most impacted by this decision. And yet we are also one of the populations that is most motivated to take action. And so we can absolutely expect to see an increase in activism and resistance from young people who have been at the forefront of major movements for justice since our nation's history. And so we absolutely expect this to be a moment that galvanizes young people into action. But we also need to balance that with what Talia said, really caring for folks who are going to be impacted the most in this immediate moment.
Thank you so much, Nicole. I also want to emphasize again, just from the faith perspective, we're already beginning to see pushback from faith communities in the way that states are beginning to implement these laws. I mentioned earlier the case in Florida where a local synagogue is suing to fight the state's law on abortion. A lot of these laws that are on a state level are often viewed as based on faith perspectives. And the challenge when you create laws based on one faith is that you inevitably infringe on the rights of others to exercise their faith. And so I want to emphasize again, our position at Interfaith is to protect faith and freedom. The faith community is not monolithic in terms of what we expect to see moving forward. We expect to see more challenges to these types of anti-abortion laws from faith communities across the country.
Thank you for that. And thank you all for all of your incredible hard-won insight. This coalition would not be as strong without all of your perspectives and all of your communities. So just really grateful for you all. Wanted to reiterate to press and general public that next week the coalition is going to be hosting a week of action. What exactly that will entail is sort of evolving a bit, as you'd imagine. But effectively, there will be each day some sort of action that we will call the community to join us, and one or two of the organizations will be hosting. We are confirming things now, but it looks as though we will be hosting our rally Monday at 6 p.m. The reason that we are not hosting our rally this evening or this weekend is because of Pride. And we are massive supporters, and we are also a part of all the celebrations. So there is just no way we could move any of that, as important as this is. So we look forward to seeing you at Pride, as well as on Monday at our rally. You can find additional information on all of these things as we roll it out on both our social media channels, as well as there will be a press release on the week of action as well. I believe that's it, unless anyone else has anything to say.
I know we're going to be getting a lot of questions on November 2022. What's it going to look like? So I just want to pass it on to Jack just before we close for a brief statement, Jack.
Sure, yeah. I think it's important to know that support for overturning Roe versus Wade doesn't approach 25% in anywhere in the country, right? Mississippi, Alabama, Texas, people do not want to overturn Roe versus Wade in those states either. And so the difference between Colorado and Texas, Colorado and Oklahoma, is not public opinion. It's not the view of our neighbors. It's not the view of the voters, right? It's that those states have a legislative majority in their state houses of Republican politicians that want to ban abortion, right? It's not about public opinion. And so as we look to 2022, I can't tell you how many times I've had a conversation with a voter who said, well, Roe versus Wade is the law of the land, so I don't have to worry about this election. Roe versus Wade is not the law of the land anymore, right? And so this election and the difference between Colorado being a state with both chambers in the governor's office supportive of keeping abortion legal, the difference between us and Texas is our legislative majority, and it has never been more important to hold that majority. So it's going to be a really tough election year. And that's the difference between legal and not legal. It's not voter opinion. We all agree that abortion should be legal. It's about Republican politicians who ran a felony abortion bill in the legislature last year, right? So just want to make sure we talk about November before we get out of here.
There was a comment about, this is Karen from Cobalt, about the panelists supporting call for a national emergency or action from the White House. I think we would, Cobalt would support any action. We are also exploring, we know it's a radical notion, but we're going there, expanding the Supreme Court, because I don't feel like waiting another generation before we can clear out the damage that's been done. So we'll take any and all solutions in the meantime. And everyone, if you're mad, you need to vote. And that's my message to folks that are out there.
Okay. We have reached 1 o'clock. Thank you for everybody that stayed here for the whole call. Thank you to the panelists and your fellow organizations and your community that you're here representing. This moment wouldn't be possible without you all, and we are all eternally grateful that these are the folks that are here in the fight together with us and in community. Just want to make sure that folks know that the communications contact for each of the organizations here have been posted on the chat. So if there's any question that you want to be directed to anybody here that did not already answer it, please email and follow up with that said person. And for everybody that is here, we will also follow up with materials from our press release to do's and don'ts about speaking about abortion in the media and how to be very inclusive and intersectional in your message, because what's most important right now is to ensure that our community has access to the most factual information, that we are speaking on the narratives and personal lives in a very responsive way. And this is how us here as panelists and organizations and you as the media are able to do just that, to respond to this moment. So thank you for everything, folks here. And we will be getting in contact with you all soon. Thank you, everybody.